Hello and welcome to this story of my life. This is a story about getting my first job and the humorous events around me getting my first job. I'm sure you'll like this because this is pretty funny. So of course, when you do high school in Australia, when you're 16, 17, you do senior school and you sit a higher school certificate. And then of course you've got the problem of you're going to get a job, right? Or you're going to go to university. And of course, in my day, when we were kids, 210 kids were in the year that came in when I was in year 7, when I was 12 years old. That was 210 kids at 12 years old. About of the 210, 70 of those kids started in year 11. So fully 2/3 of the kids, about 140 of the kids, left school at 16 and went out. They got what was called a school certificate, and they'd went out and try and get a job based on their school certificate. And those guys would basically be tradies or something else like that, electricians, plumbers, things like that. If you're going to become a tradie or a builder or something, then you left school when you were 16 and you got an apprenticeship and you studied at the technical college. You study your trade. If you thought you might go on to university, then you'd stay in high school and do your best to go on to university in high school. So in the higher years, senior years. So in year 11 and year 12, 70 of my year came back in year 11, and of those 70, I think 35 finished the 2 years. So the dropout rate during the 2 years was about 50%. About 50% didn't finish, I think. I think it was something like that. So anyhow, and I'm not sure how many went to university. It was about a dozen went to university. So out of 210 in my day, 210, maybe a dozen, 15 of those 6 years later would actually get a university position. So university positions were, one, tough to get, and two, not many people got them because there were not that many places at universities. And for the most part, you didn't need a university, didn't need a degree to do most jobs, right? There weren't many jobs that were degree jobs. Doctors, lawyers, things like that. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, you needed a degree for. But of course the competition was pretty tough. So when I was 15, I grew 20 centimeters in 1 year, and that's like 8 inches. And obviously if you grow 20 centimeters in 1 year, you have problems with your knees and your joints and your back and things like that. So I was unable to play sport for 12 months. And having realized that I was never going to be good enough to play sport for a living, my plan when I was a youngster to be able to earn a living was I'd play sport for a living. That was my plan as a youngster. But as time went on, and I tried and I did my very best to play well. One, I hadn't grown. I had my growth spurt late compared to the other kids. I hadn't grown and I wasn't good enough. So when I grew so quickly in such a short period of time, and I was injured and I couldn't play any sport at all because of my injuries from this growth spurt, it dawned on me that I'm not going to make it as a football player, right? I definitely wasn't going to make it as a cricket player. But I'd hoped I'd be able to make it as a football player. But it dawned on me I was never going to make it as a football player. So I better crack down and do my studies a little bit harder, right? So I decided when I was 16 I'd crack down and do my studies a little bit harder, and because maybe then I could get a job with using my brain, not playing football. But of course those jobs were pretty rare, right? There are many more trade jobs than there are jobs where you work with your brain, and it's very hard to get one. So anyhow, we had a trip to the Australian National University, and I was very good at physics. I had a bit of a gift for physics, and I really liked physics. and there was a scholarship for physics for the Australian National University. So I made up my mind that I should win this scholarship. And of course, when I mean there's a scholarship for physics at the Australian National University, I mean there's one of those given away each year for the 30,000 students who, or for the students of the whole country, right? There was 30,000 in New South Wales per year, so there's probably 60 or 70,000 students finish the higher school certificate each year in Australia, and one of them gets the National Undergraduate Scholarship at the Australian National University for Physics, right? One of them. And I very arrogantly said to this man, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I'll see if I can win that. I should win that. And to get a long story short, I actually did win the scholarship and turned it down. And I was apparently the first person to ever turn down a scholarship to the Australian National University, because these were the 10 most, there was 10 of those scholarships, and these were the 10 most prestigious scholarships in the country, apparently. According to the Australian National University, of course. So anyhow, I worked really hard and my studies and to do well, and I did physics and chemistry and 4-unit maths and all the rest of it. And coming towards the end of our school time, you know, it was time to write off to companies and see who might be looking for trainees, because in those days, the early 80s, one of the ways that you got a job was you could become a trainee for a firm, and you could get a job and they would pay you for your work, pitifully, but they would pay you for your work, and it would be enough to live on while you were going to university. Not comfortably, but at least you could survive, right? You could have a bed and you could be fed, and you could get through university and come out the other end without a debt on a traineeship. So I wrote off to a few places, and BHP was a big employer and they offered traineeships. So I went to an interview in Newcastle and with my friend Sue, and I went to an interview in Wollongong. And this funny story is about getting my job in Wollongong, BHP Wollongong at the steelworks. So I went off to my interview, to do my interview in Wollongong, took the train, etc., down to Wollongong with some friends. There was a group of us who got accepted for interviews, and we were all to be interviewed on the one day. We were there together, and there was 4 of us. I think it was 4 of us. I think there was Susan, Jeff, Ian, and myself. I think that was the 4. There might have been another one, but I think it was the 4 who were there on the day. And Susan had to stay elsewhere, but the 3 of us boys were put up at a hostel called Warona, and it's the hostel for the boys being trainees at the steelworks. And as it happened, there was a bar on the same block. So I was at the hostel at this place, and one of my mates from the previous year had got a job at the steelworks. His name was Darren, and he'd got a job at the steelworks. And so I was at the hostel, and he'd heard through the grapevine that I was coming down for an interview. And he came and he found me. He says, "Oh, Pete, hey, come over and have a beer. I'll buy you a beer." And so we went over to the pub, and he got me drunk. Kept buying me beer and got me drunk. And the next morning I got this job interview. And so I turn up to the job interview, and I'm badly hungover because I didn't drink much beer at the time, and so the beer had affected me, and I was hungover. And I started my interview, and there was a guy there, Dimitri. He was the guy looking at the computing science graduates, undergraduates. So Dimitri would be my superintendent, and he approved all hires. And there was another guy, Mike, who was the generalist. So he was doing the interview, and Dimitri was the guy who was checking out, is this guy appropriate for computing? And Mike was asking me questions, and I was giving answers and looking pretty hungover. And Mike says to me, "Peter, if you don't mind me saying so, you don't seem very enthusiastic today in this interview." And I said, "Look, Mike, Darren Rath Darren, this guy Darren Rath, he came and collected me from the hostel last night, and we went out, and quite frankly we got drunk and I'm a little bit hungover, so I apologise for that. I am very enthusiastic, I do want the job, but that's what happened. And Mike says, "Oh, you know Darren?" And I went, yeah, we went to school, we went all through school together, we're good mates. He's a year older than me, and but he knows me very well. If you want to ask him any questions about me, then go ahead. But that's what happened. He came over and got me drunk, and I was silly enough to go. And he said, he put his hand out and he said, "Thanks very much for your time, we really appreciate it. We'll have a chat to Darren and we'll see how it goes, okay?" And I went, "Oh, the end of the interview?" He goes, "Yep, that's the end of the interview." And I go, "Okay, thanks very much." And what then transpired was Mike, of course, called Darren and said, "Do you know this guy, Peter Nolan? You took him out and got him drunk. You must know him. You must know him, right? Tell me about him." And so Darren has given me a glowing reference and said, I was the best student at the school, came from a good family, blah, 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 blah. So Darren did my selling for me, and I was subsequently offered the job. But one of the really funny things was my three friends from school who were sitting in the waiting room. Of course, I was only in this interview for like 10 minutes. Most of the interviews were like half an hour. And I was only in this interview for 10 minutes. And I came out, and I knew that I'd probably get this job because Darren's going to put the good word in for me, right? That's how I felt. And so I was feeling very confident. But when I came out, and it was such a short interview, my friends went, "Oh, look, we're really sorry. You're not going to get the job because you went out and got drunk last night. You shouldn't have done that, blah, 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 blah." But, of course, I was given the job because my mate Darren gave me a good review. And that's how these things happen, I got a job as a trainee programmer. I'd never used a computer in my life, but I was very good at maths and physics and chemistry, and I got this job as a trainee programmer on the strength that my mate gave me a good review. That's how life works. So a little while later comes the day when I actually start my new job, and there were so many funny stories from starting my new job. So I'll tell you some of the funny stories from starting my new job. So comes the day I start my new job, and we have to go to the steelworks, this place in the steelworks. And so the guys who are working there, they ferry us young trainees. I didn't even have a car, so I was catching lifts with people. They ferry us young trainees to where we have to go for the first day. And I was staying in a place where I had to pay $50 rent. Oh, I'll tell you this funny story before my first day. So going to my job, I haven't got any money, of course. I'm 18 and I've got not a cent to my name. And way back about 4 years previously, my dad and I had made a bet. My brother had won Ducks of the School, and he got 427 out of 500 for his leaving certificate. And my dad was really proud that his son was the best student at the school, and he was praising Christopher in front of me. And I said to Dad, "I'm better than he is, I'll get a better mark." And Dad laughed at me, and he said, "You get a better mark than your brother?" He said, "You're 100 to 1 to get a better mark than your brother." My dad was a bookie. We did a lot of bookmaking. And it's 100 to 1. I said, "I'll take $2. I'll take 2 to 200 on that." And I went and got my $2 and gave him $2. And I said, if I get more than 427, I expect you to pay me 200. And my dad said, "Well, that's the easiest $2 I ever made," right? And so I got 444, and so I easily beat my brother. But my dad was dropping me off at this place where I was going to stay for a couple of weeks before I could get into Warona. And the rent was $50 a week up front, and I didn't even know that until I walked in. And my dad, I've got my bags and things like that, and I'm ready to leave. I'm leaving home. My dad's dropping me off at a college, and I'm leaving home. And my dad said to me, "Have you got any money?" And I said, "No, what would I be needing any money for?" Literally, I was 18, and of course I didn't carry more than a few dollars around with me in my hometown, because what would I be needing any money for, right? I didn't need any money. If I wanted to buy something, I'd go to my piggy bank or where I had my cash in my room, and I'd get some cash and I would go and buy it. But walking around every day, and you'd keep maybe a couple of dollars in your pocket, what would you be needing money for, right? Because you didn't buy food out of the house and things like that. So my dad said, "Have you got any money?" And I said, "No, I haven't got any money. What would I be needing money for?" He said, "Well, I seem to remember you bet me 2 to 200 that you'd get a better mark than your brother, and you did. So here's $200, and I'll give you this $200. You earned it." I'm like, "Oh, you did? I did say that all those 4 years ago. So yeah, I'll take the $200. Thank you very much. I earned it. So thank you very much. I'll take the $200. And I walked into the hostel, and I said, "Hi, I'm booked in here. I'm Peter Nolan, blah 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 blah." And they said, "Okay, well that'll be $104, please." And I said, "Excuse me?" And they said, "Well, the rent here is $52 a week, and you have to pay 2 weeks in advance. So before I give you your key to your room, you've got to pay me $104, and then you can have your room for the next 2 weeks." And I said, "Pay you for my room? I don't understand. Can you explain this to me, please?" And she says, "Sure, this is rent. You want to rent a room, right? You want to stay here. You want to rent a room. The rent is $52 a week, and you have to stay, and you want to stay here for 2 weeks, so you got to pay me $104. And I'm like, "Rent? This is rent. This is called rent, is it?" I didn't even know. I was 18. I was a top student in my school. I didn't even know what the word rent was. I never heard the word rent before. Like paying for living somewhere was a completely foreign concept to me. And she looked at me. She goes, "Where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Wagga Wagga," which is I'm from a small country town, and I've never even heard of the word rent. So I said, "Well, yeah, okay, I understand. So to stay here, you have to give us $104. Otherwise, I can't give you the key to your room." So obviously my dad knew that I was going to have to pay this rent, which is why he gave me the $200, right? I had no idea. I was going to walk in there without a cent. It's pretty funny when you think about it. So anyhow, Julie, I pay my $104 and I get my key to my room. And we go to our first day of work, and we're having kind of this orientation, what's the steelworks, what do you do, how do you get paid, blah, blah, blah. And we get to the bit about how to get paid. And he says, "You'll be paid $148 a fortnight, and you'll be paid on the second Thursday of the week, and you are paid in arrears. And we take your tax out before you get paid." And I put my hand, "Does anybody have any questions?" And I put my hand up and say, "Yeah, Mike, I got a question." He goes, "Yes, Peter, what is it?" And I said, "Yesterday, when I turned up at the hostel, they said I had to pay this thing called rent, and it's $52 a week, and I had to pay 2 weeks in advance." And he goes, "Yep, that would be right." And I said, "So how come, I don't get it, how come I have to work for 2 weeks and I get paid in arrears? How come I have to pay my rent in advance and I get paid in arrears? That doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem right." And Mike just looked at me and shook his head. He's like, "Oh boy, these guys from the country." Because he knew where I came from. He interviewed me. He was this guy who knew Darren. He's like, "Oh, these boys from the country." And I said, "If it's not too much to ask," because I said, I had to pay this rent, and I might have to catch a cab or two because I don't have a car, and I've got $96 left. Is there any way I might get maybe 1 week's pay before next Thursday?" He goes, okay, Peter, look, I'll do the paperwork for you. You take this off to the pay office, and they'll give you 1 week's pay today before you go over to your new job. And I went, okay, that sounds fair enough. Meet me halfway at least. So I got, I think it was $50 or $60 was my 1 week's pay after tax. I had to pay a little bit of tax out of my 148. So anyhow, I got my little bit of money, and then we're going to be taken to our office because this was the orientation, and we were being allocated to various sites and places around the steelworks. And his tall guy turns up. Turned out to be my best friend. He was my best man at my wedding, but this was the first time I met him. This tall guy turns up, and his name was Terry. And so anyhow, Terry turns up and he says, okay, you Peter Nolan? I go, yeah, I'm Peter Nolan. He says, okay, you're with me. We're off to the office. And I went, okay, great. And he was a graduate. He joined as a graduate in computing science, and he'd been doing his orientation in a different room. And so he jumped in his car. He had a car, being a grad. And so he jumped in his car and off he drives. And he's driving along. And he turns around to me and says, do you know where we're going? I went, no, I don't know where we're going. You're driving. I thought you knew where we were going. He goes, no, I don't know where we're going. I've never been here before. And I go, well, when did you start? He said, this morning. He goes, when did you start? I said, well, I started this morning too. He said, so where are we supposed to be going? He says, well, we're supposed to be going to the computing department out at a place called Fig Tree. And I figured that you knew where it was. And so I didn't ask. I said, well, how would I know where it was? You're the guy driving. You're supposed to know where it is. And so we were driving up the road, and neither of us knew where we were going. He knew that we were going to a place called Westfield Shopping Town at Fig Tree, but neither of us knew where that was. And of course we didn't have a map because we'd just turned up. So we had to pull up at a service station and ask them for directions to go to our office. It was hysterical. You can imagine the service station attendant. You two boys, you two hayseeds have rolled in. You don't even know where you're going to. You need to be told directions to your office. So we got to our office. It was so funny, so hysterical. Finally, we get to Westfield Shopping Town in Fig Tree, and the office was on top. The BHP had rented the office space on top of the shopping centre because they didn't have enough office space on the plant. So anyhow, we roll up at this office space, and we come in, and he says, my name's Terry such and such, and I say, yeah, my name's Peter Nolan. And we get divvied up into our new groups because there was there was like 60, 80 people in this office area, something like that. And so we get bunched up into our groups, and I get allocated. You get allocated to a mentor. So you're the trainee, and you get allocated to a mentor. And so I'm put in this group. And this guy comes up to me and his name was Peter as well. There were 6 Peters in our office. And this guy comes up to me and goes, so are you Peter Nolan? And I went, yeah, I'm Peter Nolan. And he goes, well, I'm Peter such and such, and you work for me. You're my trainee. I'm like, okay, great. Nice to meet you. Really nice to meet you. What can I do? I'm all yours. And he says, slaps me on the back and says, Peter, I have got a really, really, really important job for you. Okay? I've just walked into the office. I've got a really, really important job for you. We need to go to the stationery cupboard, get a writing pad and a pen, come back, this is your desk. You want you to sit down? So I sit down, he says, okay, make careful note. I have my coffee with 2 sugars and cream, right? Mike over here has his coffee with milk, skim milk, no fat milk, and with 1 sugar. Carolyn, she has her coffee black. And Ted over here, he has his coffee, milk, 2 sugars. Have you got that? And I'm writing this down going, yep, I got that. You want me to make the coffee? And I know how to make coffee. He goes, good, you know how to make coffee. This is good, you'll do well around here. And so they would order, I would be the trainee, I would order the coffee, right? And that was my introduction. My introduction was, I've got something very important for you to do. Here, write down how to make the coffee. When I ask for a cup of coffee, make what I want. And of course, that's what you do as a trainee. You make the coffee, right? And I cleaned the coffee machine quite a few times as well as a trainee. And because back in those days, there was 64 people in the office. Now I remember there were 64 people in the office, and there was 16 terminals, and you could only have a terminal for half an hour, and then you had to give it up and put your name on a list, and then you could have a terminal for another half an hour later. And the way that we used to write code in those days, of course, was on coding sheets. So you would write your program on a coding sheet, and you would get it walked through a walkthrough, and then you would write it out again with the changes recommended in the walkthrough, and then it would go through a second walkthrough, and if it was approved on the second walkthrough, you were allowed to type it in. Okay, so you weren't allowed to actually type on a computer until your program had been walked through on paper twice. Okay, that's how programs were written back in those days. The art of the walkthrough is dead now. And of course, because there was only 16 terminals and you had to be able to read the computer programs that were executing, what we used to do was we would print the computer programs and put it in a folder and put the folder in a cupboard, right? And so these computer programs would get printed, put into folders, into the cupboard, and the folders had to be labelled and sorted and all the rest of it so they could be found easily by people. So when the support guys called us and said there was a problem with the program, and this was the offset and etc., and they could print the dump that the program gave on a printer in our office. You didn't have the program, you had to go to the cupboard and get the program out. And of course, in our system, there were 1,000 programs. And I came at a time before they were all printed and put into the cupboard. And so one of the jobs as trainees got to do was to print these programs, make all these folders, and file the programs into the cupboard, right? And so one day my mentor comes to me, Peter, and says, okay, it's your job to make the folders this week. And I'm like, yep, sure, I'll make folders, I'll print programs, I'll make folders, I'll do whatever I'm told. Whatever you think I need to do, whatever you need's done is good by me. He goes, great, and I like that attitude. So anyhow, after 2 or 3 days, I was making these folders. It was just a piece of cardboard. You had to fold it over and put the masking tape down each side to make it stand up, and stick stickers on it, and draw the margin lines, and then neatly write the name of the program on the folder, etc. And I was doing this for a week. And on about the 3rd or 4th day, one of the other contractors comes in. I can't remember his name even, because he was only there for a month or two. And he says, Peter, what mark did you get in your leaving certificate? I said, 444. And he said, well, how was that in your area? I said, oh, that was the best mark in my area. And he said, wow, I'm really happy that you're so well qualified to be making those folders. You're the best student in your area. You must be really well qualified to make those folders. And I said, well, I'm the trainee, and the trainee's job is to do whatever he's told, right? And he's like, hey, I like your attitude, boy. That's a good attitude. I said, yeah. I said, I'm making folders. And, I'll make folders as long as I'm told to make folders. So it's like, yeah, fine, you're making folders. So anyhow, the next funny part of this story is this guy, Peter, he'd won the university medal. He was an honours mathematics student, and he'd won the university medal. So he was pretty freaking bright. He was a very smart guy. Good friend of mine. We were good mates. In my time there, he was my mentor. And so, to be lucky enough to be mentored by the guy who won the university honours medal in mathematics, that's really getting lucky, right? So having him as my mentor. And so you can imagine that he was an incredibly smart guy, and he knew he was an incredibly smart guy, and he got a lot of the most difficult jobs put on his table because he was a really smart guy. But he was new to this computer system that we were going to develop, and new to these new terminals, etc. And so he was he was one day sitting at this terminal, and he's trying to figure it out. He's won the university medal. It's not going to take him long to figure this out. And one of the other trainees, like my age, one of the other trainees comes over and says, "Oh, you're doing it wrong. This is what you need to do." And etiquette in the programming world is you don't touch another man's keyboard. Right? Etiquette is you don't reach over and touch their keyboard. It's their keyboard. They're doing what they're doing on it. Never touch another man's keyboard. So the etiquette was don't touch another man's keyboard. Don't reach over him, and that sort of thing. As they're sitting there working on their program or whatever they're working on. And so this young kid, George, who apparently was oblivious of this etiquette, reached over and started hitting keys on Peter's keyboard to show him how to do things. And of course, a university medal winning honours mathematics student being lectured by an 18-year-old trainee is not going to work very well for the 18-year-old trainee. And so the first I knew about it is Peter came back to my desk and he slapped me on the back and he said, "Peter, it's your lucky day." And I said, "Why is it my lucky day?" And he said, "Young George just reached over and started lecturing me and typing on my keyboard without asking, treating me like an idiot." I said, "Yeah, so how does that mean it's my lucky day?" I didn't get it. And he said, "George is going to be making the folders from now on." And I went, "Oh, great, that's really good. It is my lucky day. Thank you very much for that." So George made folders. I think it was like 4 weeks. George made folders. And he was told, "Don't ever reach over a person's keyboard again. You do it again, you'll be making folders again." So that's kind of the funny story of me getting started in my first job. And I hope you liked it. Certainly that funny story is much better than the one I did previously of my grandmother's death and doing the eulogy for that. So I hope you liked this funny story, my starting at work and how that worked out, and the lessons along the way of my friend Darren giving me a good reference despite taking me out the night before and getting me drunk, and being willing to do whatever I'm told to do, being a high-scoring student, etc., but coming in as a trainee and being willing to make the coffee, clean the coffee machine, and make the folders. That's kind of how these things go. Okay, so, oh my goodness, it's like 33 minutes. I hope you were jogging or something while you listened to this. I hope you found it entertaining and interesting. Comments down below. Thanks very much for listening.